Bonsoir, bienvenue à tous, chers étudiants, chers professeurs, chers architectes, chers invités et amis. Je suis très heureux de vous accueillir ce soir pour cette conférence organisée conjointement par Archizoom et l'UPIAV. La conférence aura lieu en anglais, mais une fois n'est pas coutume, si vous souhaitez une traduction simultanée, vous pouvez vous munir d'un écouteur et vous mettre sur le canal 1. Je remercie d'ailleurs par avance Rita Groberio, notre interprète, dans la cabine. Elle nous permet à tous de suivre en détail cette conférence. Et autre chose importante, n'oubliez pas de nous ramener les récepteurs après la conférence. On n'aimerait perdre aucun de ces petits appareils. Merci. So, I can switch in English now. I am very happy to welcome you, Rahul Mehrotra, and your wife, Nandita, tonight. It's a big pleasure to have both of you at EPFL and at the ENAC faculty. Before your introduction, let me just warmly thank our partner for the evening, the UPIAV. UPIAV stands for Union Patronale des Ingénieurs et Architectes Vaudois. It is an association of architects and engineers, and I am very pleased to have shared the organization of this event with them. It shows that our university, the EPFL, and Archizoom, the Gallery for Architecture, maintains a strong relationship with the professionals involved in the building trade, which is important, obviously, but it's not always the case, when you are working in research and education. To introduce the UPIAV, I will give the floor now to its president, Mr. Sandro Pacifico. Sandro, c'est à vous.
Merci. Mesdames, Messieurs, bonsoir. C'est avec un très grand plaisir que je vous souhaite, au nom de l'Union patronale des ingénieurs et architectes vaudois, une cordiale bienvenue à notre traditionnelle conférence d'automne. Les habitués l'auront constaté, nous inaugurons cette année une nouvelle formule avec la mise sur pied d'une collaboration avec l'EPFL et Archizoom. À l'heure des fusions et des mises en réseau, le rapprochement avec Archizoom nous permet de poursuivre une programmation de conférences de très haute qualité. Pour rappel, nous avons eu le plaisir d'accueillir en 2009 Lord Norman Foster et en 2011 l'architecte français Rudy Ricciotti. Archizoom nous permet aujourd'hui d'envisager de nouveaux horizons et de nouvelles découvertes et nous nous en réjouissons d'avance. Pour celles et ceux qui ne nous connaissent pas ou ne nous connaissent pas bien, l'UPIAV représente et défend les intérêts d'environ 160 bureaux d'ingénieurs et d'architectes sur l'ensemble du canton de Vaud. Parmi les nombreux sujets qui nous occupent, la formation tient bien évidemment une part importante et nous y consacrons une part non négligeable de notre budget, de notre énergie, par le biais de soutiens directs ou indirects. Je citerai ici le récent soutien à la publication MAP 12 qui regroupe, vous le savez sans doute, les projets de diplôme de la section d'architecture de l'EPFL. Nous soutenons également et nous donnons différents prix et bourses aux différentes filières de formation, allant des filières apprentissage aux filières académiques. Et nous avons une présence importante au Salon des métiers qui se déroule d'ailleurs ces jours au Palais de Beaulieu à Lausanne. Nous sommes donc très heureux de nous retrouver au sein de l'EPFL, aux côtés d'étudiants et de professeurs, pour un événement majeur de notre association. Je remercie par ailleurs Cyril Veillon et notre secrétariat, Gabriel Weber et Philippe Fogel, pour l'organisation de cette soirée. Et je me réjouis de vous retrouver à l'issue de cette conférence de M. Mehrotra pour partager un moment de convivialité. Je cède sans plus tarder la parole à M. Veillon pour la présentation de notre conférencier du jour. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. So, dear Rahul, I must say first off that I have tried to find a date for your lecture for you to come in Lausanne for at least a year, at least. You are a very busy man. First, you have an architecture practice, RMA, based in Mumbai and Boston. Your build work includes the LMW corporate office in Coimbatore, the Hewlett-Packard campus in Bangalore, a rural campus for the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Tulsapur, and an extension to the Prince of Wales Museum in Mumbai. You are currently working on a social housing project for elephant and mammals in Amber. This gives her a beautiful poster that you know. And you are also working on the laboratory building for the Novartis campus, closer to here in Basel. You are also very busy in education. You teach at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University, where you are a professor of urban design in the chair of the Department of Urban Planning and Design. And you write on architecture and urbanism. One of your most recent books is called Architecture in India since 1990, which was published last year. And finally, you are involved in numerous juries and committees. You serve on the boards of the London School of Economic Cities and in the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. You are a member of the steering committee of the prestigious Aga Khan Award for Architecture. I welcome tonight the president of this award, Farrokh Mehrotra, by the way. And you are a member of the global jury of the third Holcim Award competition. Speaking of which, Archizoom has the pleasure of hosting the ceremony of the Holcim Award at EPFL next Friday, 12, in the Rolex Learning Center with a lecture by the gold winner Diebedo Francis Kere. You are all invited. You have just to register. You can go on our website to attend. It's archizoom.epfl.ch. This is for next week. But tonight, all your commitment, Professor Mehrotra, shows an accurate sensibility and a strong awareness on the major challenges in architecture today, both regarding the quality of construction and the role that architecture plays in society. And this not only in your huge country, India, but also in the world at large. So I'm very interested, we are all very interested to find out and understand how you address these questions with your Indian touch, and we look forward to listening to you. Rahul Mehrotra, I pass you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Cyril. Thank you for those very, very kind words. I think you made me sound busier than I am, and so I think I'm going to be in trouble with my wife because she's always saying I'm very busy, and you made it sound like it's even more. So while I thank you, I'm going to have to talk to you about this later. But this is a real pleasure to be here. It's an honor to start with, to be even addressing an audience like this, and I'm really grateful to the Institute and to Cyril for having taken the trouble to do this. For me, it's also, I was sharing with some friends, a really emotional moment to do this lecture here in Lausanne. When I left India for the first time, I was 18 years old, a few months more than 18 years old. The first place I went outside India and I landed was in Lausanne. So my first glimpse of the outside world was Lausanne. And I went and worked for 7 months, or 6 months, from November to March or April in Châtel Saint-Denis. And I worked with an architect called Alois Page, who surprised me by coming here, and I've lost contact with him for 33 years. So it's a real pleasure and incredibly emotional to make that connection again. It was also the first time that I saw so much snow when I arrived here. And it was a very important experience because when, as a young person, you go out of the country for the first time, you don't know a word of French, and you live in a place where everyone speaks French. The only person who spoke English was the school teacher in Châtel Saint-Denis, so I had to phone him every time I was desperate for a translation. But it was an amazing experience because it taught me many things which I carried away. It taught me the kind of rigor that you bring in Switzerland to construction without fetishizing things too much. There's a practicality and a pragmatism. It taught me about democracy and opened my eyes to the way your cantons and communes are organized. And I spent many hundred slides taking photographs of the profile of buildings that are put up on construction sites, and I was very, very fascinated by that. And of course, one carries at a young age those impressions in very profound ways. So I want to thank you all for that moment in my life, which was very, very important. Today I'm going to transport you to a completely different part of the world, India, and my talk, which is titled Working in Mumbai, really is about sharing with you what effect a place might have in the way you think as an architect and you approach building. And I think the kind of localism that comes from those experiences, some of which are very intangible, is what I'm going to try to capture to you, for you today through some observations, but also through some projects. Because landscapes like the one in Mumbai and working in a landscape like that is about negotiating a place where global flows, which we are all experiencing around the world, don't erase and remake landscapes as easily as what's happening in China or what's happened all in the Middle East, but those global flows are forced to occupy fissures in the landscape, which starts creating very interesting hybrid conditions, and it starts creating very startling adjacencies in the built environment. And I think this it's what I think is unique about a place like Mumbai. But I think it's often intangible readings that don't often manifest themselves in terms of material, I think are the ones that I have engaged with substantially, and I think they've had a big impact on the nature of the practice and our approach to building. And so, just for clarity, I'm dividing the lecture into two parts. The first part, I'm going to share with you a series of issues that I think have helped us organize our own thoughts about building in India. And then the second half, I'm going to share with you 6 projects quite quickly. In the first part, I'm going to intersperse it with projects so you get a sense of what I'm referring to. So the first one is research and advocacy, or research as advocacy, or research advocacy, which has been very important for us. And I think for the practice, this happened quite accidentally. Research became an integral part of the practice. And this happened because when I started working in Mumbai, I responded to the fact that there was no clear position and articulation of questions in the city. There wasn't very much on the history of the city. So one engaged with, and this is really a part of the practice. These are all the books we've produced in the last 20 years on different aspects of the city, of architecture, but all as an instrument to reflect how we might ourselves operate in a landscape like these. And a lot of these were self-initiated projects. Some of them are not even about scholarship. They're about advocacy, because they became documents that became the basis for us to act on an issue, on urban conservation, on policy matters in the city, etc. And so the fallout of this work was very interesting, because it suddenly opened up many directions, because it not only made me see different ways that one can engage with the built environment, but it also manifested and highlighted many issues which challenged us, and me in particular, but I think which challenges us as a profession to also be engaged with. And I think that is really the important aspect of this. Some of it even spawned institutional structures, which I'll show you in a second. So it led us, of course, most naturally into documentation, into looking at what the historical environment meant, how it could be captured. And I think with the virus of technology and the way it's sort of taken over our profession completely, I think just measuring, touching, feeling, scaling buildings is very important. And we landed up doing many, many portfolios of measure drawings, which led us into historic preservation by default. I'm not trained as a preservationist, but we began to do a lot of work with historical preservation, which was very, very interesting, because for me, the obsession with history was not as important as learning from it how you intervene in fabric, in material, in material fabric. How do you understand weathering? What happens in terms of life cycles of materials? And so this is a palace in Hyderabad, which we've now converted into a museum. We used traditional techniques. So for example, that one column in lime plaster takes about 3 months to build because it's done in many layers, and lime has its own hardening time. So it gives you a completely different sense of time and rhythms. And these different moments and times, I think, is what characterizes India, because they all collide and they exist together, which is, I think, the fascinating thing. And now it's become a museum on the Nizam's family, but it's a low-cost museum. It has no air conditioning and humidification. It's very easily done. But it's become also a public place in the city. We also then got involved in a bigger project like the Taj Mahal, where we actually wrote a management plan. And this is the Taj, but actually the precinct is all of that, which has all been parts that have been discovered, and we wrote a whole plan to manage this, which was fascinating, and that's a lecture in itself. But it allowed us to, in projects like this, bring sensibilities about materials to intersect with questions of urban design and planning, and how do you perceive the management of a precinct like this, and what does the river mean, etc. And one learned a great deal from this, and like I said, it's a whole lecture, so I won't go into it. But we also then got into restoring areas, which we did, which I'll show you in a second, to make it a visitor center, so movement to the Taj would be easier. We did this about 5 years ago. We even used traditional techniques of using the camel to grind the lime, because the pace at which it's ground, it gives you a completely different texture than putting lime in a machine. So again, the sense of time, but also discovering the presence of these incredible crafts that already exist in India, without fetishizing it, but trying to bring it to the fore in projects like this. Or trying to do these panels where the ability of craftsmen to operate out of an image, I mean, they rejected all the measure drawings we did, and they said, no, we have a different technique to gauge what the scale is. So one also sort of learns from that, and this is how the center was restored, and now it's a visitor center. We resurrected traditional ways of doing brick laying, sizes and proportions of brick, so it meant sourcing all of that. And then it also led, like I was saying, because of this intersection of urban design and planning, we began to get involved with what resulted in the first urban conservation legislation in all of India. This was the first time in 1995 that we had a legislation to protect the historic district of Mumbai. And this was taking these ideas to another scale, and because my training is in urban design, I began to see that there's a complete blur between planning, urban design, historic preservation, and architecture, which I think is something that we as a profession, and those of us in the academy, have to address quite quickly, because the siloed nature of our disciplines is becoming very non-productive. And I think for me, some of these experiences, just by default, the engagement with research, opened up my mind to look at it in completely sort of different ways. And so we began to get involved then. Once this sort of area had been declared a historic precinct, I found nothing was happening on the ground. So then, as activists, as advocacy planners, we began to get engaged with on the ground, and we began to take different areas of this historic district and come up with strategies where we could involve people to restore them. And how do you then, as an advocate planner, do that? And so this was the first one, and I won't show you the 6 of them, but I'll just show you this, which we positioned as an art district. And it wasn't an art district historically, but it was interesting that because I wasn't a trained preservationist and I was an urban planner of sorts, who are always compelled to look at spatial possibilities for the future, as opposed to preservationists who are trying to freeze a moment in time. By colliding those two sensibilities, you began to construct significance for the contemporary moment. So the question we then asked ourselves was, what is the contemporary engine that can drive the process of preservation, as opposed to finding the significance of the place and trying to freeze it because it had no interest. And in a post-colonial situation, this becomes critical, because when the creators of a built environment in a post-colonial situation and the custodians, the people, our culture who looks after it, are two completely different cultures, it throws up many complicated questions for preservation, because the narrative cannot be as direct as if you were preserving the same buildings in England. So we got into this process of constructing new significance for these places. And so an historic area, because it had a museum, it had some art galleries, we began calling it an art district. And we invented a festival, and we invented all sorts of mechanisms that were used to fund the preservation project and to give a new sense of public space to the city. And so we invented a festival, we got sponsors, we did street furniture and signage, which in our governments, because we have such other crises on housing, sanitation, this falls very low down in their priority. So we said, as private citizens, could we privilege some of those things in terms of our priorities? And so this district then began to get perceived as an art district. And the buildings, like this Grade 1 building, got restored completely from money that was raised by these instruments of the festival. An old parking lot we restored, and it became a plaza for concerts to raise money. Little gardens began to get used. People started using their facades and the street for galleries. And so it became also a public space, because when you have very polarized societies like ours, and I'll discuss this much more, of the rich and the poor, we have to find as architects ways to soften the threshold between these disparate groups. And animating the public space is an important one. Those of you who know India, you will always see these things happening in the private realm, never in the public realm so easily. And so these little things which are taken for granted in the West, perhaps we did. But it also led us to projects, because what we then did was we initiated a project to say that, look, this is the museum, they weren't being used efficiently, let's add things which will integrate it with the art district. So these were projects then we sort of invented in partnership with these institutions, because they weren't thinking about it like this. And so my point here is that from a path of research and a path of documenting the historicity of it, leading to urban legislation, and then going to smaller micro projects, allows the architect to span this entire range, which is incredibly exciting and possible only if you don't see the divisions between these disciplinary boundaries. The moment you see the disciplines, then you are bound, and the thresholds become very hard. They don't become porous, whether it's landscape architecture and planning. So this is the museum, which is the center of the art district. That's an historic image. And this was a warehouse with no windows. There was one window here to bring things up from a crane and a skylight. And it was 50,000 square feet of space that was really used as a dump. And so we said that if you added a veranda or a gallery here, and you opened up these openings, and you had, because of fire regulations, ways that you could move in and out of it, you could use 50,000 square feet for art, which means for the art district, suddenly you've added a massive percentage of usable space and situated it more firmly in the people's imagination. And so what we did was, we of course did these drawings, but we added this one little intervention, and we took the skylight and made it an atrium, and suddenly 50,000 square feet of space was added. And of course this is a Grade 1 building, and it was very complicated to then get the permissions to do something more contemporary, which was in rhythm with all of this. And what we came up with through a series of studies was to come up with a very contemporary intervention. We used the old stone that came out of the wall that we broke for the opening, so that you had a memory of it, but this was all done in steel as a contemporary intervention, so that the rhythms were the same when you were in the building. The skylight was used as a circulation, and the building was kept separate from the old, with the idea that if another generation disagreed with this, they could remove it without hurting the fabric. So the question of reversibility, in a sense, which came from our learnings on preservation, we began to apply with this sort of contemporary sensibility. And then later we also suggested to them, there was an existing building here which was quite ugly. We said, by making a very low-key intervention, we can create a visitor center with a shop for baggage, security. Instead of having security everywhere, you clear it all up. And so we did this intervention, which was a small kiosk for baggage and for security, all very invisible, so it doesn't alter the lines. Otherwise, they have little sheds here for security. It's sort of terrible. And so this was a little intervention around an existing building, which you see there. It's just the veranda, which is made in stainless steel. It reflects the thing, and this is where you take your bag and you give your bag there. It's all very invisible, so you don't see people. It's abstract, it's contemporary of the time, and it sort of reflects the images around it, so in some ways it kind of disappears. And that's when people go through security, they come out through the kiosk. It's just a very light pavilion. And then, of course, the research is also extended about trying to, through these experiences, understand what is this city about. And I call Mumbai the Kinetic City. And I believe very much that in the urban planning and urban design discourse, one of the most non-productive aspects has been the fact that we call something the informal city. Now, there's so much literature on the informal city. And so when you set up a binary, when you say the formal city and the informal city, or even the rich and the poor, your affiliations as an architect reside in one or the other. So the people who are now working with the informal city sit in the informal city and doing projects in favelas and slums and all of that kind of thing. And I think this binary is non-productive because it becomes a confrontation. So I use the third category, like the third world idea, which was invented politically many decades ago. I call it the kinetic city, a city which has a completely different response to urbanism, to density, to the notion of temporality. And I think Mumbai and many cities in Asia, many cities in India in particular, are really the kinetic city. And so we've also been working a lot, and we're going to be putting this together as an exhibition soon and a publication, this notion of the kinetic city, a city that is in flux. It's a twitching organism, and how do you kind of read it? And for the kinetic city, architecture is not also the only spectacle. Festivals like this are the spectacles, and this is an amazing festival of Ganesh, which got over a couple of days ago, where 5 million people participate in this. On the last day, after 10 days of worship, 2,000 or 3,000 of these large idols are immersed in the sea. And these idols are made out of clay. And as the idol dissolves in the water, the memory of that event and spectacle dissolves. And so the kinetic city encodes its memory in enacted processes. And the festivals become an incredibly powerful instrument to do this, which challenge even the idea of the static city as architecture being the only instrument by which you can order cities. And so architecture then plays a completely different role. And what has happened for all of us, we are all being bullied by what I call impatient capital. Impatient capital has been determining the form of architecture and cities around the world in the last 2 decades with the process of globalization. Impatient capital wants to be realized very quickly, and then the architecture that comes out of it it's vendor-driven. It's of a particular kind. It's about maximizing land values and all doing it very quickly. So the variations then become how much you can twist your building, I suppose, or how you can clad it. And this architecture of impatient capital is, I think, the biggest task for us globally, and this happens in different measures, in different ways, in different places. But this is, I think, the project of resistance that I think would resonate across communities of architects, professionals across the world. And I think this is important to bring to your notice. And in the kinetic city, space is made in different ways. The kinetic city is about how you make the boundaries of the city more elastic. How does unimagined uses happen temporarily? So in this case, for the festival, here you see cars, but by 10 o'clock at night, it becomes pedestrian, and this becomes the big auditorium for people to gather, to pray, or to sing, or to perform. And it suddenly becomes your conference room, which is for 10 days defined by these lights. And of course, in that weather, you can do it. And there are many, many examples of this. In the same festival, entire structures are made in plaster of Paris and they disappear. And these cover just incredible interstitial spaces. Or the most popular example is this one of cricket, which is these open spaces in Mumbai, which are the Maidans. And cricket is a very important game in India, as some of you might know. I mean, in India, we say that it's an Indian game invented by the British. And so it's very, very sacred. And what happens in the evenings in Mumbai is that the same space by about 7 o'clock in the evening is used for weddings. And the only place that is not touched is the pitch, because that's sacred. And so this is the club members of the club that owns this having high tea. This is the wedding. This is the kitchen that's making samosas, giving it to the members, as well as giving it to the wedding. So this incredible synergy, and by the morning it disappears. It touches the ground very lightly. It's bamboo, cloth, string, and by the morning it disappears completely. And this ability of the city to expand its margin to accommodate use, which has come out of density, comes out of many, many reasons, some of which are not positive, is, I think, a very particular form of urbanism, which relies on temporality. It relies on the rhythm of time in very, very interesting ways. And so that leads me to the second question, which is softening thresholds. Because when you have a city or a particular kind of urbanism like this, it also comes out of the fact that these adjustments have to be made. So the kinetic city is not about grand vision. It's about trying to imagine grand adjustment, because that's the way the city operates. And so within the city, there are ways of resolving this. But when this condition of polarity between the rich and the poor, etc., goes to the fringes of the city, it becomes highly problematic. And so what is happening now within the city is you have this kind of density. And this is very different from, say, the condition in Latin America or many other parts of the world, where favelas or slums or the informal city exist in spatially defined areas, not on the same space. In the case of the Indian urbanism, because of the democracy, which is, I think, an operating democracy, this coexistence is mind-blowing, and it's very, very adjacent to each other, and which is very particular, I think, about India because of this kind of synergy that exists in many ways. And then as a result, you get these extremes, the world's biggest house, which all of you, 4 people live in that house, and the world's smallest sort of mode of inhabitation. You get these mind-blowing sort of extremes which begin to pose themselves. But when you go to the fringes, that polarity plays itself out because it's not challenged by density. The challenge of density allows these adjacencies to work. But in the rural landscape around Mumbai, where everyone is building what are called farmhouses, the rich are really building farmhouses, and a lot of practices survive on that. All young practices have to start with that. You get a completely different condition, where you get an inversion, where what really happens is that you get the Palladian villa paradigm, where the essence of symmetry and the image of the building is on the exterior, versus the Indian paradigm, where your image and your symmetry arrive from the courtyard within. And there's a reversal of this process, and therefore a completely different kind of urbanism. And you begin to get projects like this with walls and fences. And this was not even done by an architect. I met the contractor going on the boat, and this is for a famous pop star in India. And I said, who was the architect for the project that you're building? And he says, no, I was the architect. And I said, you designed it? He said, no, the client just gave me an image of the White House from Washington and said, make it as close to that as you can, and this is what I did. So this sort of aspiration of the rich, in a sense, they're playing out their fantasies in a suburban location because they don't have that opportunity in the density of Mumbai, where even single-family houses don't exist any longer. And so we were challenged with doing several houses there, like all young practices are, and over the last 20 years we've done a number of houses. And I'll just show you a few, not to explain the architectural project, which some of it might be evident, but the few things we were experimenting with. So here, for example, this was a young filmmaker. And we said, how do you soften the threshold? That means when you build as urban people sophisticated architectural pieces in these locations, what might be the generosity or the gesture that a house like this can make to engage what's around it? And we came up with the idea of this is the living room of the house, which is just an open veranda. So when the people go away and they close the door, this becomes an offering, together with the taps that are fed into a well by the water that's collected on the roof, become an offering to the village. So the caretaker can use it, and with his family sit there, with his friends sit there. I've even seen a wedding happening there of the local village. So it becomes a way that we can make spatial modulations which become these sort of offerings, but they become experiments, at least they become gestures towards how houses like this can be dematerialized for that process. And so that's the plan of the house, and that's the living room. And the house closes, the bedrooms face another side, which is a little more suburban. It has a lawn. The front is left very natural, as if it was an extension of the rural landscape there. And this becomes an offering, a veranda, a public space for the caretaker, for his family, for his friends from the village. And another project in Ahmedabad, we were building an orchard. So instead of placing the house at the beginning of the orchard, which is the colonial paradigm, we decided to put the house in the center of the orchard. These are weekend houses, so it sits in the center of the orchard. It's oasis-like. When you go in there, there's a pool which is just fresh water, no chlorination, so it recharges the well. But it can also be used to wash the fruit in the orchard when the owners are not there and they go away every fortnight when they come on the weekend. And when the house is closed, and this is open, when it's closed, this door, which is this door, gives access to the workers in the orchard to then use the pool and the courtyard for their own production. So there's a kind of dual coding here, which means that you can then potentially, by spatial organization, create different kinds of associations with the space, which becomes interesting as an idea. Or in this last project that we've done near Bombay, by creating a series of plinths which are attached to the kitchen, the owners can invite the villagers, people who work in the farm, to come and sit as if they're within the house and offer tea, etc., without really necessarily penetrating the privacy of a house which might have, want that privacy. And it's a very simple house, even as a type, in a way that it sits there. And what I like very much, or what I'm very satisfied with, is when our houses get referred to by everything except the fact they're a house. So this is called a school. All the villagers say, oh, that house that looks like a school, so that's the house. Or another house, I'll show you another one which looks like a factory. And this dematerialization of the image of the house is another way of beginning to challenge the typologies, to blur or to soften that polarization that otherwise begins to exist, and to respond to what might be really very particular conditions in that situation, which is economic, cultural, social. And the inside of the house has the sophistication that urban people might want, and the privacy that it might. But because it also has principles which we use in all these projects, I'm not highlighting those of climate. So nothing is more than 1 room deep. So everything is naturally ventilated, using the water as a way to cool the air and therefore make it cooler in terms of temperature, etc. So there are many other climatic principles that I'm not elaborating here, which are also, of course, embedded in these projects. So this last project, which is on a tea garden in Kunur, where the client, of course, bought the garden, which is 4 acres, and they wanted to remove the tea and have lawns and waterfalls and rockeries and all the usual stuff. And we said, look, you should leave the tea. And we came up with he said his brief was, I wanted to look like a log cabin. So we said we'll do that. And what we finally did is the 3 bedrooms are clad in wood, which sit under the stainless steel roof. So those are the 3. We kept calling them log cabins in our plans till he found out that we were really fooling him. But then he realized the value of what we were doing, and he accepted it. But this is referred by the villagers as the tea factory house, which is interesting because it subverts that sort of association and that image. And of course, one has touched it as lightly as possible. We did very low-cost mock-ups to see where the column should be, how the tea would be less disturbed in terms of drainage, because drainage is very important for tea. That's why tea grows on slopes. We also sort of used materials that were the local. We used a lot of craftspeople. We created nice modulations of light. These are the log cabins I was referring to. There are moments at the entrance which are different, which is the portico, and then these are the 3 bedrooms which are in wood. The rest is a lot of public space because it's the views that you really sort of enjoy. And it, of course, frames wonderful vistas from within the house. And it sits very comfortably in terms of scale when people are working around. It leaves the tea undisturbed, but I think it's yet a response. Now, of course, these are houses for very rich people who are intervening there, and the challenge for us is how do you soften it, and we can argue whether they're successful or not. But I think even embedding an aspiration, an ambition to do that, I think is a useful way to begin to articulate a discussion about this. So I come to the 3rd issue, which is building ecology. And I think this is important in that just to remind ourselves that building ecology, when we talk about sustainable design, which has now become kind of equal to that, it really is a combination of social ecology, the economy, as well as physical design. And we can't detach it from these understandings. And that's why I go back to the title, Working in Mumbai. I mean, for us, we are learning lessons which have to do with the social. How can one make social the material, or with economy, and trying to see how these might inspire us to build new narratives about how you can build. And so this image I like very much because of the sachets that you see here, which is something Procter Gamble invented. The book that's called The Bottom of the Pyramid by C.K. Prahlad talks about how the bottom of the pyramid in terms of markets is the big one. And so let's take shampoo. A bottle of shampoo is the whole wage of the laborer who's working on a building site for a whole month. And they can't buy a bottle of shampoo because it's a month's salary. So by having the small sachets that you have, it's what you need in a few cents you can get for 1 baht. So therefore they can disaggregate their income. And there's this kind of incrementalism that's implied here. I mean, we haven't begun a discussion that begins to get inspiration from aspects like this in terms of we see things as finished products. We don't factor time in perhaps adequately. And I'm not saying everyone doesn't. People do. But the meta-narrative that the profession is engaged with within the debate of sustainability has many parts missing, which have to do with incrementalism, the temporality question, and of course social, cultural, etc. And so therefore what has really happened is that the whole debate about sustainability, there are 2, I think, in my critique, 2 or 3 important things have happened. One is that it has it has been hijacked by the high techs. So at some moment, through the 60s and 70s, one had wonderful examples of low technology in Africa, British architects working. This was the cleansing of their morality in the post-colonial period. They were contributing to do social institutions there, but there were great innovations there in terms of ventilation materials. At some moment in the 80s, the high techs completely co-opted the debate about sustainability, and it became a mechanical and chemical fix to a problem. So we assume that let's make a problem, then we'll find better mechanical and chemical fixes to do it. So the whole debate, even on LEED, is about insulation, making the glass many more layers, and putting 3 more layers of blinds, having more efficient fan systems. But the point is, how do we get to the root of the problem? And of course, in different climates, it's much easier to do. And so the other thing that went out of the debate on sustainability is the social as material, the implications of organizational questions, lifestyle, etc. And the third thing that went out of the debate was just the notion of weathering. We moved the debate from the question of weathering to weatherproofing. So everything that is driving our discussions now and driving the industry is really about weatherproofing. So we're obsessed with sealants, and we're obsessed with whether the sealant is transparent and how many layers of glass. But we are not looking at weathering as we did, which means life cycle of materials. Can we design a building that some materials might have to be replaced in 10 years, some in 30 years, which is what the lessons of historic preservation tell us. And so the question is, how do you loop that back in a way that it can actually enrich and inform us and get away from this? And of course, climate becomes very important in this question. And in India, for example, we really don't have such, in most parts of India, let's say in Mumbai, we don't have that much of a climate variation. The monsoon is the only moment where we feel a sense of threat, and we feel a landscape that changes, the sky changes, the humidity changes. Otherwise, it's quite flat. And so this has become also, of course, very important for us, because the threatening bit is one, but the landscape exploding, the happiness that comes with the joy, the optimism, the hope is also wonderful. But also, how does one design for that? So do we only photograph our buildings when it's not raining? But also, are the buildings really designed for the rain? Are there elements that we can work with? Which is, I think, these are things and traditions, say someone like Jeffrey Bawa in Sri Lanka began to talk about, which has become very inspirational for us. So those become moments. And this idea that the building can be divided and thought of in design terms by life cycles of materials. And so that, I think, it becomes, so those are ways I believe we can enrich the debate of sustainability. And that takes me to the question of crafting tradition, because also, because of the high techs that have preempted this whole debate, craft also, I mean, in the West, craft has disappeared. I mean, it exists, but it's expensive because it's in great demand, but there's not enough supply. In India, it's much more of a continuous tradition. And so that continuity is mind-boggling, and as I showed you in the conservation projects, it exists. It's all around you. The question is, are we abusing it? This is the question I'm asking us as architects in India, because we seem to be perpetuating the materials like wood or even stone. We are perpetuating a very narrow spectrum of materials which are easy to extend the craft in, but it doesn't begin to address the question of industrialization, other materials. So the bigger question is how the government, after agriculture, construction is the biggest employer, and it's defined as labor, not as craft. How can one change that debate at a much larger level, whether it's road building or industrial products, and not celebrate and fetishize craft within a very narrow spectrum of materials? And so, for me, I think while we boast of traditions in craft and what our craftsmen can be doing, I don't think we are discussing adequately how we can extend it in the spectrum of materials within the culture of building in contemporary India. And so our studio is a very small studio. These are just images which are, this was 98 or so, and now, and you can see that drawing boards have disappeared, but it's very small. We are interested in model making. We make a lot of things. We also engage with craftspeople, all the way from traditional craftspeople, who we can begin to get them to do contemporary things in associative and collaborative ways, to our conservation projects, which I sort of showed you a little bit of the Taj Mahal, all this inlay work. It meant going back to the original quarries to match the marble, very rudimentary instruments, but I think that engagement is an important one to support. And of course the question is, how do you extend it? And extend it down to the making of concrete, or extending the traditional crafts of stone. And that, of course, leads to the second last question, which is the question of the local and global. You know, we used to think about thinking globally and acting locally. And the problem is, in the last few decades, because of globalization, it's been exactly the opposite, because people who've been thinking locally have had the power to act globally. And so what was developed in Houston as the curtain glazing and all of that was exported all over the Middle East. And I think the whole process of globalization has been emblematic of that. And I think that's an important question for us to ask again, because I think the resonance with the idea of thinking globally but acting locally is an important one. But how it gets textured in the contemporary world is very important. And I think in the case of India, again, the coexistence of these things, that's my carpenter's toolbox. But it's wonderful how the pantheon of gods coexists with the blades and the castrol heavy-duty oil in a very easy relationship. And so it slips into life and in and out of life very easily. And I think that's worth recognizing rather than fetishizing and again setting up a binary which becomes non-productive. And you know, there's been an incredible resurrection of Vastu in India, which is Feng Shui. Everyone is using it, and it's mind-boggling. And of course, the habitat would be a Vastu nightmare because everything is a different angle. But these are abstract notions. They don't determine architectural form, but they determine location in terms of sacred spaces, and their origins are scientific. In east is the kitchen, so you get the morning sun. Southwest is where the master bedroom will be, so you get the breeze. But of course, because it got co-opted again by the Brahmins and by the priests, it got corrupted in a way that it became very complex. But this exists, and we at least recognize it. And in fact, all the projects I'll show you, well, 90% of the projects I'll show you, we've actually taken this as part of the client brief, because they do believe in it. It's a question of faith. And so then how do you reconcile this abstraction of tradition and the resurfacing of the ancient within a contemporary idiom? For me, is very, very exciting, and something that one sort of looks at. And you know, this is the inauguration of a building we did where they let cows into the building to basically crap all over the place, but it's sort of a way of sanitizing the building. But you know, it's a belief, and one had to accept it, and these are beliefs that exist. This is a Vastu consultant who he's an engineer with a master's degree, but he has no certificates up. The certificates he has is all his meetings with holy people, just to endorse the fact that his brushes with holy men has made him someone with an insight. It's a completely different, and all the rituals that go with the building. So this building that I'm going to show you, the location of all the major spaces were determined by consultation with people who practiced in this thing. And one sees that as being legitimate as long as it doesn't impinge on maybe the integrity of the form. And the last thing that I'm going to talk to you about is models of practice before I show you the projects. This is the book I just did on architecture in India in the last 20 years, which is the 20 years that coincided with our practice. So these are insights from the field. But essentially, I broke the book down by what I call practices, models of engagement, because I found that these modes of engagement coexist in the Indian context. And what is different about these modes of engagement are not only their values, which means what is very interesting for me in the research was the global practices, which is the expression of impatient capital, which is all the glass and the curtain glazing, and then the regional practices, which is the extension of modernism. And I think most architects that you would even know about from India fall in that category of regional manifestations. Then you have alternate practices like people like Laurie Baker, who are working for the poor and doing things at smaller towns. And you have counter-modernism, which is a resurfacing there. What was interesting was that where the images of modernity were the strongest, the social transformation agenda was absent. And even in the regionalist practice, which we celebrate as the aesthetics that we all feel comfortable with, and the practices we feel comfortable, actually has no social transformation agenda. By the time you come to the fact that there are actually temples being built, which are in ancient traditional modes, they have massive social transformation agendas. And this inversion from our understanding of modernism and its sort of raison d'etre is very important to understand in India, because the social transformation is happening where the modernity is resurfacing in very strong ways. And this is the big challenge, I think, for architects. And so I just sort of threw these maps in to locate where our work is to. So if you looked at India, those of you who followed it through the 60s and 70s, This was the architectural spine of awareness, which started in Chandigarh, New Delhi, Ahmedabad, Baroda, Mumbai, Charles Correa and others working in Goa, Pondicherry had some modernism, and this is where it all sort of lay. And everything that we looked at would have been on this architectural spine, right? In the last 20 years, what I've studied in my book, the economic, and this is where also the economic activity, etc., would have happened. In the last 20 years, this is where the axis has shifted. This is where the production of architecture is happening. It's all happening in Kolkata, Hyderabad, Chennai, Bangalore, the IT, all the things that you hear about. Now, what's interesting in this new modes, in these new sites or geographies of production, the baggage of modernism doesn't exist because the schools were not embracing that project, and the landscape didn't embrace that project. And essentially, what even happened here, I think what you have to realize in India is that aesthetic modernity arrived in India before social modernity, and you had a complete mismatch. And so when we despair about the state of our modern buildings, etc., it's partially got to do with aesthetic modernity arriving there before social modernity, unlike the West, where social modernity and aesthetic modernity actually were synergistically intertwined. And this dislocation is a very critical thing to understand, or a very critical lens to be able to discern what's happening in India. And so, in addition to this, what's interesting is these are all the new cities that are going to explode in India. And there are 392 cities which in 20 years, or towns which in 20 years are going to be 1 million people. 400 million people are going to live in places that I honestly can't even name 10 of them. I have to look at a book to name them. It's mind-boggling how this whole landscape is going to shift. Now, for us, the important thing is modernism, a particular set of protocols and ways you give instructions, you build, the images that you engage with, those protocols break down completely here. By the time you come to this landscape, the protocols will break down completely. And that's why the proposition in the book is that we have to look at different modes of engagement with building, with craftspeople, with clients, with the protocols that we set up, the feedback loops we create. And I think that's why looking at models of practice is an important question, not only for us as practitioners to open up our minds, but also for academics to address in pedagogical questions in what you see, what inspires you. But the protocols that are embedded in those processes become important. And so our work has been located largely, well, in Mumbai, but in the parts that I'm referring to. We've done work there, and I'll show you. But we've got very embedded in working in these places where the protocols break. And I think in retrospect, one wasn't doing this very consciously when we were working. In retrospect, one thinks that because we were engaged with preservation, we were engaged with many advocacy, and our clients were governments and NGOs and private clients, we began to, I think, imbibe the fact that you needed different kinds of protocols to operate in different kinds of projects. And that then equips you as an activist or as a professional in terms of how you engage with the problem and how you traverse that landscape of the resistances that we all deal with when we are working. So now I'm going to show you these 6 projects, which will be, well, I think I will finish in 15 or 20 minutes to make my hour. But these are projects that are broken into 2 categories. The first are what I call global programs. Because what happens with global programs is you imagine, or the client assumes, a global image. And then the second set of projects is what I'm calling local programs, which are programs that are very much, can only happen in India, so to speak. And what happens with local programs is the clients often, their aspiration is you caricature the local. So you make it like huts in a village, or you do that. And I think what we have to do is actually inverse that. That is what think globally and act locally, I think, to my mind, means. That you can take global programs that come with the force of capital, that are coming with a kind of transformational agenda on a landscape that perhaps can't accept that it would be an intervention that would be disruptive, and you kind of legitimately, you localize it in ways that it operates, but also makes it stronger as an intervention. And in the local programs is how you invert those programs to resonate more global meaning in terms of the way you aestheticize it. And I think, for me, this becomes a concern. And I'm not going to revisit this question, just please hold that at the back of your mind as you see these projects. So this first one is a project for India's biggest machine tool company called Lakshmi Machine Works. They are in collaboration with companies in Winterthur. They're cutting edge stuff. And in 90, this is a building we finished in 97, and we were approached in 94. My office was only 4 years old at that point, and they didn't let us publish it because they're really very low-key people in Coimbatore, in South India. They were just sort of beginning to give it physical expression, and so we went back to doing houses because no one knew about this. But this was the brief that they gave us. And they even told us that in 94, when our economy had just opened and you could not get materials from outside India, when they gave us the brief and they wanted to do this glass tower with a garden in front with a fountain and parking behind, they said, don't worry, we've also got the license to bring the glass from Australia, so that won't be a problem. So we were, of course, shocked, and it took us a long time, but we managed to convince them to do that and to create a building that sits much more in sync with the landscape of industry, a very hybrid landscape that's around it, and the image of the building is an internally sort of situated one. And what we came up with as an idea was a series of courts which would modulate light very beautifully in the way they drew it in, and the scale of the courts would change the quality of light, but it would also allow for ventilation and for the building to operate very naturally. And so that's really conceptually what it was: an entry court, a water body that went over 2 floors to cool the building, because this is in the rain shadow in South India, so it's a very dry climate, and the building is just 7 degrees cooler just because of the water. And a sequence of spaces that you sort of walk through in section, you enter, and it's modulated, all held by this roof, but a kind of very clean vocabulary within it, with corridors that are places people can meet, and it gets more intimate as you sort of go into the building. From the street too, it's transparent, it's not a big reflecting box that no one knows what's inside. And so this is related to the question of thresholds, that even that visual access for people who are not part of a corporation like that is a way of softening that threshold versus creating a very hard edge by having reflective curtain glass, which would have come in that case from Australia. And within the building, we have this waterfall that's used to cool the building, and a series of courtyards at different levels. The green sort of, in a kind of telephoto lens kind of way, it collapses the green and makes it very tight and makes it very present. And on the different levels, we had artists do installations which became places people could meet. We used the local clay tiles. And as you go into the building, it gets more intimate where the family that runs the building sits, so it almost feels like a traditional house within this sort of more contemporary vocabulary. And we had 7 or 8 Indian artists with Rajiv Sethi coordinating them, do building elements. So we said we don't want art on the wall, but what we'd like is installations that actually also become elements in the building. So Manjeet Bawa, who's a famous artist, did this railing for the bridge. We worked with these sort of stone companies, and we got large granite, which was a mine the company owned, which is used right through. But the edges of the granite, when we dressed it, we used those strips to create the waterfall. So we kind of try to recycle that material for effect. We did installations. This is 104 Lakshmis, which is the goddess of wealth, which is the symbol of their company. But we did an installation of this rather than just sort of doing a big sort of board, which was done in stainless steel like a flag fluttering in the wind. And these were images of what Manjeet Bawa usually does. And this is the first time he also translated his figures, in this case, into copper, and that's Manjeet Bawa and Rajiv Sethi. And then we developed a vocabulary of about 30 jalis, which are screens, which is a very traditional element. And what we did was we used an artist called Yogesh Rahul, and we took this as the inspiration, which is the old Mughal jali. And we created a whole vocabulary using scrap metal from the machine tool company. So this is all the metal that comes out of the press when they're making the components of the machine tools, and that was used and integrated as these sort of jalis. And that created a kind of vocabulary and an image which works quite differently at different times of the day for different modes of privacies in front of toilets, etc. And they're stacked so they can be screwed open to be cleaned and things like that. They also become large portals. They begin to resonate tribal art, but they're actually just scrap metal from the machine tool company, which for me was an interesting thing. This is definitely not one of our projects, but this is what is built for information technology. This is the World Trade Center, a park in Jaipur. In Jaipur, in summer, the temperature is about 45 degrees centigrade. You can sometimes fry an egg on the road. But this is a brand new building, which is yet being finished, as you can see. And information technology, and this is what I mean, when you have global programs, there are associated global images that go with it, which are highly problematic. So we were asked to design information technology software park for HP, Hewlett Packard, which is the American company, and this is Electronic City in Bangalore. And you can see this is Electronic City. I mean, this is driving India's economy. That is the campus of Infosys. But you can see the disparate moments here. You can see the lawns to please the American clients that visit. It's all quite nonsensical. So this is their campus, 20 acres. They had already done 10 acres using another Indian architect, who I won't name because I'm going to criticize. And what they'd done was what you see in yellow is software, which needs air conditioning. All of this is, pantries, photocopying, toilets, places to sit, etc. But these are glass boxes that are wrapped exactly like what I showed you here. That's the image there. I'm not showing you an image because it will reveal who did it. So we studied this to realize that you could actually disaggregate it. And what we did was we found these trees, so we made a street here, and we put all the programs we believed that didn't need air conditioning along that. We introduced water. We put the software blocks as modules that plugged on with green courtyards between them, and put the generators and mechanicals at the back. A very simple diagram with food courts at the two ends. Now, what was interesting, and that's the plan, so what you see is this is all air conditioned, yeah? None of this is air conditioned that you use. And those are study models. But talking about leads and all of that, 200 square feet per ton of air conditioning is what we were told is business as usual. All our consultants told us. And if you had to get a LEED certification, they said you'd have to go up to 290. It would be expensive and actually ridiculous because people do curtain glazing. Then there's glare on the computer, so they buy very expensive mechanized blinds. This happens all over the world, and it's sort of a contradictory thing where you've made a problem and you're solving it with a mechanical or chemical fix. But what we did was we said, forget 290, we don't want the LEED certificate. The client agreed. And we took it up to 705 square feet per ton, which was like 3 times what LEED even wanted for a platinum. But we didn't do this what we did was we basically convinced the client you didn't need to air condition 70% of your space. So it was a low-tech solution, but it changed the diagram of that discussion completely. And I think Bangalore is a very good climate. It's an air-conditioned climate almost. But what it also did was it gave us the occasion to create architectural spaces, which these software things don't have because you're trapped in a glass box. And so that was the challenge here. These are some conference rooms. The staircases are in copper, which will become the color of what you see. Where you can walk along the building, and within the conference rooms, the greens are framed. These are the street areas, which are double-height spaces, so people can call out to their friends and they can talk. They have places they can sit and meet. They can, when they come out of work. Otherwise, when you're isolated in one block, you can't meet each other unless you make a rendezvous point. And then, so it becomes a completely different atmosphere in terms of the materials you can use, the color, the spaces, you can modulate them. These are the food courts. They're not air conditioned. It's completely naturally ventilated. They have different scales of spaces where you can sit and communicate with people. Between the software blocks, we put very minimal glazing. So from the eye level, when you're sitting on a desk, you see the bamboo, but it doesn't affect your computer screen, so you don't need to have very large blinds. You can have blinds that you can communicate, a pergola, and green. So they also become courtyards people can sit in. It's actually a low-tech solution, but it's not the image that software wants, but it's very efficient. And so then extending that idea, we were asked by an infrastructure company to do a building for them in Hyderabad, which has become the new tech area. It's called Cyberabad. And again, it's all these glass boxes, which are all glass. This is the only box that's not glass. It's clad in brick, and it's designed by Mario Botta, who's your Swiss architect, so it's not glass, and I think he's put a little glass there, but it's a very sensible building. But these are all glass boxes, and this was a site we were given. And so it was interesting. We began to study Hyderabad. And these were the two things that we looked at. This is a typical glass building there. And what's interesting is there are lots of riots in Hyderabad because they want to divide the state now. And when you live in a glass house, you don't throw stones at others. Of course, everyone throws stones at this. So now, when you order the curtain glazing from the vendors and the contractors, when they give you the shop drawings, they also give you shop drawings to attach nets with hooks. So the nets, these fish nets, they come with the glass, so that every building now has fish nets, so that you can have the glass, but no one can break the glass by throwing a stone. So it's another aesthetic that's sort of developing, which is almost totally ridiculous. But it's perpetuated because the power of association through the way global capital perpetuates itself. Often it comes from somewhere else. It predetermines what has to be built, and some drawings come, a vendor comes, and they build a glass box. And then we looked at this little hut, which is fabulous. This is a water cooler. It's a natural water cooler in Jaipur, actually, which is a similar climate that the government puts up every year. And they put it up in the summertime. It's naturally cooled, and you see a little kettle there. That's where anybody can go. It's free. You go there and you put your hand out, and somebody pours you water, cold water, and you drink it, and you can go on your way. So let's just sort of look at that for a second. So we began to document it and study it because I was just so fascinated by it. And that's the man. He's just come to work. You saw him go into work, and now he'll put a kettle. So he's open for business. It's the water cooler. And people come and they drink. It's cold water. It's clean water. People stop on motorbikes. And then once in a while, the man comes out with a small cup of water, and he sprays water on the reeds, which is by evaporation cooling the hut. And then within the hut, when he goes back there, he cools it again. So as air moves through it, very, very low cost, you begin to get this. And then the pots in which the water is kept are also made in earth, which means they're porous, which means through evaporation they cool. This is the old matka in India, which everyone uses. And so you get very cool water in the process. People enjoy it. And we thought, could we sort of be inspired by this? And so for this infrastructure company in Hyderabad, we took this as the starting point and researched it a little bit, measured some temperature, and thought, let's experiment it. Again, even if it's a gesture, it might be worth it. So what we came up with was an idea of a green wall. Again, studying green walls that I see all over Europe, which are stuck on buildings, which is not the intention here. This is a veil. This is a double wall. It's a double skin. One happens to be green. And what it has is it has a misting system in the green. So every now and then you can mist it, and the air goes through it, again through evaporative cooling, and the inside of the building is a spec building. But what you can then do is 3 different kinds of gardens. And so we just thought that some of these principles of the screen, of the reed, of the evaporative cooling, they come from Muslim traditions which exist. And Hyderabad is largely a Muslim landscape. And so looking at these traditions more deeply, one realized, because we had done the palace restoration, which is the Nizam's family, we began to understand how these devices were being used. And so we began to get confident about extending it. And so every facade then has a different pattern, because it can be a changing facade. You come back in winter, you don't recognize the building, hopefully. This has just been finished, so that's why I say hopefully. And then basically we studied many species, we set up a nursery, we saw how fast plants grow, and then we came up with a facade. It's essentially a spec building in reinforced concrete, which is the vernacular of India today. Any little village, they can do it, so it's interesting how that's been appropriated. And then we said, let's put our energy in designing a trellis, so that even if the plants don't exist, the trellis has some beauty. And how do you design this trellis? So this is what we came up with, the trellis fold, so you have a lovely area for parties, and a big podium under which all the parking goes, and water becomes places for people to sit, and the parking disappears under the podium. And so that's a Photoshop image, of course. And it's really what would happen if you made nicer scaffolding and then didn't take the scaffolding off. And these are the important conference rooms which sort of jut out, and the parking is all below. And so we concentrated on making this trellis, which we said again, if we can take new material like aluminium and handcraft it, because aluminium is usually extruded by the ton and no one bothers. But we said, let's get people involved. And the man who had made the grills for us in the LMW project, we involved him. And he set up this small factory outside Hyderabad just to do this, and he employed 20 people, so it was very, very handmade. It was sort of left as a texture. It was hand ground. It was profiled in a way that we could have the misting system sort of fit into it, and that's what the trellis looked like. It was really this beautiful scaffolding that stays on, and this is before, of course, the plants sort of grew on it. And the section wasn't just a simple one. It also had a modulation to define spaces with courtyards. So you got beautiful light. You also got air escape there, hot air. So there's a kind of logic even in the way the section is developed. And of course, then it gives you a spectrum of spaces to define different departments, the entrance area, the upper areas with the skylights, materials that define the circulation cores. And then that's what happens with the green beginning to grow. This is a podium with much wilder grass, which is local and native, portals in stainless steel that define moments that you can enter. These are hydroponic trays that need just drip irrigation. So the misting is only to cool it when you want to. The plants grow with misting, so you don't expend too much water in the process. And then these become the important rooms where you don't interrupt the view as you would do in a place like that. Now, what is interesting is that you're beginning to see the patterns develop, which I told you, the red flowers are beginning to come. This is the hydroponic tray, which is a catwalk, which means that for 5 floors, the gardeners can go anywhere they want in the building, and they can tend to the building. And for me, again, go back just for a minute to the social thresholds. In a corporate office like this, in a place like Hyderabad, which is polarized, not only religiously, but also economically, you would have 20 gardeners who would have been working in the garden and have no access to the building, often a glass facade. They only see their reflection. They don't even know what's within it. And that becomes a form of exclusion. Now, of course, architects can't solve these social problems, but I think we can create the moments, the spaces, the softening of thresholds where even if accidentally, these moments of contact begin to occur. And for me, this really becomes the moment where that happens. And so within the conference rooms, as executives are talking about infrastructure projects in some other part of India or the world, they actually see the gardeners work. But the gardeners also have equal penetration of what is within. And so even if it's eye contact, this becomes also, I believe, a mode of softening the thresholds, of creating these penetrations, these porosities within buildings, which sometimes other kinds of materials exclude. And that's what the building sort of looks like. When you mist it, that's what happens, and you can set the misting at any level. We are yet studying that. We haven't perfected it. But this is just a short clip which gives you a sense of how this trellis was made in this little factory, which was all sort of handmade with these 20 people. A mold was created, which was profiled, so to integrate the misting system. And the aluminium was, of course, bought and melted and cast into place, and then molded, fixed, finished by hand to be sort of used in the building. So again, it becomes handmade, it becomes an involvement of people more in the locality. Maybe it'll be copied and used for other things, which would be, I think, for me at least, very, very interesting. And it's on the fringes of the city where it's possible to have land or a yard to do this kind of thing, but I think it also takes the involvement. And that's when the misting system is on. The plants haven't yet grown. We are in the process of tracking it. We also have a young scientist now studying temperature difference at different times to see whether this is just an aesthetic kind of thing or does it actually make a difference. It definitely is great atmosphere when you're there on a hot summer day. To feel it's raining around you is very, very beautiful, and the whole building sort of gets engulfed in this, but it's 3 or 4 feet away from the main facade, so it doesn't sort of affect that, and all the different plants are beginning to grow now. And it gives you the sense of moisture, the sense of wetness, which in a dry climate, as you all know, is very, very welcome. But it also lets the texture of the aluminium stay intact. And I'm going to run through this very quickly because we're running out of time to get to a last project. But we also have tried to look at these local projects. And this is the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in a very remote location where we use passive methods. So we were inspired by the vernacular house. We expanded that idea. And this is about now a 15-year-old project using wind scoops and cooling, but trying to develop an aesthetic from it, but also experimenting with ferro cement to train local people to create a prefabricated method of construction, but which also gave us very good insulation because when you fill this with low weight material, you got very good insulation when you kind of got the rigor of a rhythm of a very low cost construction. And by adding small pavilions, you added the number of spaces. This is very low cost housing for them. But you created another kind of aesthetic, which is about passive cooling. And similarly in Goa, in a think tank, which was meant for 10 people to meet there and meditate and contemplate and discuss, what we did was a large roof under which there were a series of meeting rooms, but the roof of the meeting rooms became places for more informal discussion, for yoga, for group meetings, and developed a kind of aesthetic of passive cooling from that, using the local laterite material, which weathers in very beautiful ways to create fantastic textures. These last two projects, all of these are about very local programs. And this is amazing in the slums of Mumbai to even have a boy smiling like that. And we were asked by Magic Bus, which is an NGO that works with street children and slum children. And they create a campus outside Mumbai where these kids are taken on the weekends for recreation, for health, nutrition-related stuff. And Magic Bus, because it's this red bus in which it's a magic bus because they get to a different environment. And so we decided to do it as a series of pavilions, which are set on the landscape. But what was very interesting for us about this project is because we were also involved with NGOs, we said, how do we make this a research project? How do we use this opportunity to evolve something which can go back to the slums and the street kids who come here for education as an architect in terms of the built environment, in terms of texture, material, ways of putting things together. So the constraint that we set ourselves was we would use only material that you see in slums. And we began to develop a palette of materials, which are often materials that are recycled. But our idea was that if these same kids saw these materials used in sophisticated ways, that when they began repairing their own houses, and of course this is totally founded on the assumptions that slums are not going to go away for 2 decades, unlike the way my government believes that they're going to go away in the next few years, I think these kids could dramatically alter the way their own houses are made and situated. And then further, we looked at them as typologies. So, for example, the dining room is an open veranda with a kitchen, but it also could be a public toilet with an education area. And we used to, as we were designing this, we were photoshopping them into existing slums to see what are those aesthetic equivalents. And so these are the dormitories in that project, very simple materials, cement, modules. This is the dining, which is essentially an open veranda with a cement floor. You see the other pavilions. All materials from that palette that I described to you, the beds in the dormitory and the module of the windows. I mean, there's just simple principles. Very light construction. This is all galvanized iron. It's not stainless steel. This is a big roof where we didn't need the terrace in the program, but by adding a terrace, you added another space by just lifting the roof slightly higher on this area. And you got a interesting modulation as a result, and also thinking about how you embed these back. And then how can they make a difference? So learning from the project, we began to work with NGOs, and I think it's amazing to see a child like that with pure white socks coming out of there to go to school. And if you look at the average of toilets in Mumbai, it's shocking. I mean, we were talking earlier about doing workshops in Dharavi and things, but this is the big problem, where the UN Human Development Report says it's 1 toilet for 1,440 people. The Bombay Municipal Corporation says it's 148, and their aspiration or target is 1:50, which is also embarrassing and shocking, because it should be 1:6, so you could say at least one whole family uses it. But that means even the aspiration is not to solve the problem. So we started working with Spark, which is an NGO that believes it's 1:800. They're sort of optimistic. And we said they were doing 300 toilets that the World Bank was sponsoring, and they were doing them all over the place. So we said, look, we'll do it pro bono. We said, we've done research, let's work with you. We didn't charge for this. It was just a humanitarian project. And what we looked at were these toilets. This is what happens. They don't get used. Basically, in a couple of years, no one uses it. Women and children can't even go near them. It's highly problematic. And so what we did was we came up with a prototype of an idea where we said we'd use the same green principle we were developing. The toilets would be stacked. The women and children would be up so that they were safer. We would have the caretaker's house there with a community center on top of the toilet. So the caretaker, who is the lowest caste usually because he's cleaning the toilets, now gets the penthouse in the building. And so he's really on the top. And so he gets the best view. So there's this kind of social engineering dimension there. software, and children can use it. And then I went to one of my clients, the man I designed that house for, which was in the rain, those beautiful images, and I told him this story. I made him feel so guilty that he gave me the money for the solar panels, which is not in their specs. Because what the solar panel does is it takes it off the grid, which means children and women can use it at night, because a contractor, otherwise to save money, doesn't let the electricity run. So this was a very big move. And of course, we couldn't build many. We tried. So we did many Photoshop images. This one was built up to the plinth, and they stopped the work. They said, you can't go further, because they imagine the slum will go. But we know from reality it won't. And my argument was, even for 20 years, if one generation's life can be more hygienic, it was important. We are yet fighting this. And so we did a number of sites, and none of them got built. One we managed to build. We took a very remote slum where we even felt the government people wouldn't go. So we did it there. No one saw it. It got done. We put the solar panels. It's become a space that people are using. The government is trying to move people into that housing. No one goes there. And it's become a community space. This is just bamboo, which they can renew. The solar panels are in place, and it works. I mean, there are a lot of problems. I'm not proud of this as an architectural piece. We were limited by the specs. We wanted to do it fast. And we have now been researching, and we entered a competition, which we won the first prize, and we're hoping to take further, where we are trying to see how this kind of institution can be embedded much more into a location, and how in different locations, different local materials can be studied to create different vocabularies which could engage local craftsmen. So that's where we are at, and I'm going to end with this project only because Cyril put it on the poster. I sent this as a joke, but he thought this was the best poster. And this is a project that we've done for elephants and their mahouts. These are our clients. They're also among the poorest people in Jaipur. Most of the mahouts and the elephant owners are Muslims. This is an accident of history that even elephants are in Jaipur, because the Mughals bought them there for ceremony and all of that. And they stayed, because these are tropical beings. There's no reason they should be in the desert. And so this became a bit of a project of advocacy, because the Public Works Department saw it as a pain to do this, because, why were they doing this? And they did a competition, the government, and I think 4 or 5 architects were invited. And I think most of the responses, I think we won this because our response was one of landscape. I mean, I just said the fundamental problem here is water. If you don't solve water, forget the architecture. We did spend time on the architecture, but I knew that was a losing battle, and it was a losing battle. So we concentrated on the landscape and the water. And it's taken 5 years with governments falling, corruption, us having to threaten to resign, but it's moving along. And I'll just quickly share this with you. So these elephants work in Mumbai. They take the tourists up. They're painted in these toxic colors, and that's the reason why you see that they have a discoloring of their skin, which is very sad, because it doesn't get washed enough, because they don't have the water. And this is the site the government gave us, which was actually a site that sand quarry people had used to take out all the sand. And so it was really a lot of holes, so it was very difficult to build in, but we saw that as an advantage. This is where they live right now. They live on top, the elephants at the bottom. It's terrible, because the bonding between the mahout and the elephants is a very complex and critical relationship, that to control the elephant, it's almost impossible. So we made it a landscape project and looked at the existing holes and what we could do with it. That was the site when we got it. So we focused on where the depressions were, and then came up with a site plan and put the housing on areas that were non-consequential. So it became a landscape plan. We added other institutions, which wasn't part of the brief, but now the government is thinking of building them. And then we focused on trying to design what the house might be. It's 400 square feet per family, because it's low-cost housing. So the challenge was, how do you expand that? And so instead of making row housing, we created these clusters using the local stone. And it was also done with a minimal, because it's low-cost housing. We felt let people change these, and they're bound to change it. We don't have the control. So the focus really became landscape. And essentially, instead of doing houses in a row, we made them by clusters, so you have a hierarchy of courtyards. So you basically make elastic, and you create more shared space. So therefore, the house actually doubles by adding all these possibilities of where they can add space. And that's what Cyril was excited about using for the post. But that's what a site visit is about. And this was interesting as an image, because elephants can't lie flat. They have to lie on a mound. And that's why they always lie down on a mound, otherwise they can't get up. And so for the small, medium, large, and extra large, we had to actually judge what would be the right levels of the slope for them to be able to comfortable in terms of getting up. And so what happened was, they built all the houses, because the Public Works Department is interested in the architecture. That's where you get all the profit, so to speak, in terms of the kickbacks. And so they built the thing, and the government fell, so they couldn't do anything with the housing. It was just lying there. There was no water. But and we had no budget for the landscape of water. So when I talked to the local craftspeople, they told me that, look, don't worry, just go ahead and make that hole proper. It'll cost nothing because the clay composition is such that in one monsoon it'll harden, and you don't need a lining, you don't need the budget for it. Trust us, it'll happen. And we went by those instincts, and within a monsoon, we captured water. The elephants started coming from 5 kilometers away where they were living to bathe there. It began to change the topography, and so that was March 2007, that hill, and this is what it looks like in 2010. Just the presence of the water there has transformed the complete landscape, and the presence of water there has actually created not only an ecology, it's created species, we've done tree planting, it's changing the atmosphere, but this is the critical thing. The bonding between the mahout and the elephant, the social condition, gets totally exaggerated as a result of that, because the amount of time they can spend with their animals in the water is what makes that relationship actually work. So these are, when they come back from work, they actually have to walk in these situations because this is not a tropical climate where they are indigenous animals, and this is what they do for work at the Amber Palace. So this became the inspiration for a number of architects, and I know that a number of schemes were about taking the architecture of this, which, unless you address the water, was a problem. And this was just when the houses had been built, the water, and now you're beginning to get this. And it's evolving in interesting ways because now the government sees the possibility, so they're actually supporting us in the process for the first time in 5 years. And we should have resigned on this project long ago. I don't know what drove us. It was, again, I think just the concern for the oppression in a way that people who were using this were sort of facing. And that's where you see Amber, which is where they'll go to work. And of course, there's a whole landscape that is evolving, which we are trying to convince them to leave as is, because I think it would be rich in itself. And just the fact the elephant can pluck grass like that is just very interesting. And now they're beginning to occupy these houses and beginning to live here. And what's interesting is that, again, each cluster is evolving differently. These were roofs designed to take all the food for the elephants to be stored on top, like you see here, which also gives insulation, so it's a low-cost way of doing that. But every community is thinking of their cluster differently. These guys wanted a lawn, and different families are doing different things, and it'll evolve dramatically. And now we are taking that to try to make a visitor center, to bring more attention to it. The government is giving us money now to do the pitching for the next water bodies, and we're designing it as ramps so that the elephants can walk naturally into the water quite easily. And so this is a project in itself which will give it more stability and will hold the water for much longer. But you can see the amazing transformation that's occurring as a result of it. And I'm just going to use exactly 2 minutes to summarize. I'm sorry I've gone over time. But really, I think working in this condition, if one has to learn, I think there are concerns. We should not even use the global south and north. The concern is really the majority world lives with a separate set of issues that as architects, I don't think we have enough of a narrative about. I think the idea of thinking globally and acting locally, we have many inspirations for this. Number of Swiss architects here itself, but of how this can be done much more rigorously. And I think this idea of the grand vision versus the grand adjustment is a critical question. Because I think as the world becomes increasingly global, we have to really be cautious and careful about accepting that things are growing more alike because they begin to look more alike. Because when we engage with a deeper excavation of the site on which we operate, the locality on which we operate, and when we engage in an understanding that draws on both the objective realities as well as the subjective perceptions of the site, the differences actually emerge more strikingly than before, where differences were actually assured when things look different. So this is something we have to really be cautious about, because even though they're looking the same, it's actually getting more different. So I think architects obviously then have to find a more rigorous way of defining the complex, emerging, cultural fabric of multiple aspirations, especially in places like India, which is a mutinous democracy. and more importantly, to see this cultural fabric as something that's ever evolving. Like I think one of the other big sort of red herrings in our discussions is the question of identity. Identity is not static. It's about what we construct, about what we evolve, and architecture plays a big role in evolving this. In fact, in the words of Arjun Aputharai, the anthropologist, he said, culture is a dialogue between aspirations and sedimented traditions, which I believe we have the ability to excavate, to use productively, and to nourish what we are doing. And I think that's these interpretations as designers is what helps us make a place richer. It helps us nourish the place on both ideas of the future as much as those ideas about the past that we are sort of otherwise obsessed with. And this highly pluralistic environment, especially in the case of India or my experiences of working in India and Mumbai, I think requires a planning and design mechanism, or at least what I've learned, and attitudes, so that's what excites me, that continually negotiate between the differences and actually dissipate the binaries that we otherwise set up, I believe, as non-productive design instruments. So I think it is architecture then can't become the sole instrument for placemaking. It's a very important instrument, but it has to embed itself in other processes. And so then it becomes a form of resisting the fact that one entity can remake and make and remake and prevail in the making of an environment in its own image. And I think that's what makes working in Mumbai and the landscape of India unique and challenging. And I think once the architect sees these various differences as being simultaneously valid, the simultaneous validity of this is, I think, crucial. The challenge then, of course, for us, we are setting ourselves up for a challenge, because how do we go beyond the polarized binaries? And I think that's, if we can crack that, and if we can get excited about that, if we can develop meta-narratives around that, I think that's the space that in which we will engage with architecture and society more generally, much more meaningfully. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry, I went over.
Thank you very much. If you agree, we can take some time for questions. If somebody has a question, even in French, we could translate it. No question? It was very inspirational. A very strong inspiration. I want again thank the translator Rita Groberio for two reasons. First, because like all Indian, you speak very, very fast, but you speak with a lot of patience. So, passion. Sorry. And so, thank you both. First for your passion that you transmit, and for the performance of the translation. And now I welcome you all to share a drink together in front of Archizoom exhibition space. Our exhibition is still open as well if you want to visit. And I wish you a very good evening. Thank you very much. And thank you.